Our gospel for this Sunday comes from Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. And it's found on page 62 in your New Testament if you'd like to follow along. Hear the good news for this day. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In the city there was a widow who kept coming and saying, "Grant me justice against my opponent." For a while he refused. But later he said to himself, "Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming." And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" This is our good news for this day. Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Grace and peace to you from God, our Creator and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. As a church and pastor, we've now been together 3.5 years.
Wow.
Time flies, or time goes really slow. He's still here. It may not seem like a considerably long time, but it is, for the record, the longest I have ever been the pastor of any church. As of this month, really, as of this Sunday, I have been here longer than I was at my first church in California. And I was there for just over 3 years. The traditional first call, the average first call, lasts 1 year and 1 month. So I didn't run out of there, is what I'm telling you. And whenever I bring this up, that this is the longest I've been at any church, people start to wonder, does that mean that Pastor Adrian is leaving soon? Some of you are hoping, some of you are wondering. No, I don't plan to leave anytime soon. That was better than the grumble I was expecting. But I bring this up because at this point, I think in my head that you have heard all my stories. All of my best stories, and you know them by heart. But look around. Look at those of you that survived the storm of the century. Many of you weren't here 3.5 years ago. We are a different collection of people than we were 3.5 years ago. And beyond that, even though I like to tell myself that you've written down and memorized every sermon that I have ever preached, the reality is there's a chance, a small chance, that you've forgotten a few things. Now I know many of you are saying, "Not me, Pastor. Here's my sermon journal. Take a look." But believe it or not, some things might have been forgotten. And a few weeks back, I began telling you part of my faith story. And I just told the very beginning of it, because in my head, you knew the rest. But then a few weeks back, I was talking to someone and they said, "Pastor, tell me your story." And I wanted to say, "Don't you remember my sermon on July 13th, 2013? But they weren't here, and if I'm honest, even I don't remember my sermon from July 13th, 2013. But I bring this up today because my story, my faith story, is truly built around our gospel passage for today. Jesus finishes his parable with this: "And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them." When we cry out to God day and night for justice or for answers, we are not left with silence. We are left with God coming to us again and again. Not always in the speed or timing or with the answers that we would want, but God does respond over and over again. I want to tell you my story, my faith story. I'm going to be largely focusing on the miraculous parts, what we would traditionally call miraculous, because they carry a common theme. God responds, whether we like the responses or not. But to begin, I've always been a part of the church, and yet I'd never really considered myself part of the church. I'd say growing up, I didn't necessarily believe any of it. Sorry, Sunday school confirmation teachers that thought they had me. You didn't. It wasn't real for me. Faith wasn't alive for me on any level. So with that in mind, our story begins with me graduating high school, and I took a trip to Europe. I was lying in bed in a hostel in Italy, and I started asking myself what I knew. What I knew about God, what I knew about the reality behind it all, and I quickly agreed with myself, because it's always nice to agree with yourself, that I didn't know much. For sure. I couldn't get past all the doubt, all the uncertainty, all the questions, all the things I did not know. I started asking myself all these unanswerable questions over and over. I kind of made a list in my head. And that night, I more or less said the prayer. I wouldn't have called it a prayer, but it was basically a prayer. God, if you are real and you want me to know something, you're going to have to show me something, because I'm done. With all the questions, with all the confusion, all the doubt, that night I became an agnostic. I no longer believed in God. The next day I got on our tour bus, and we were supposed to go somewhere really interesting. Now you think with a lead-in like that I would remember where we were going, but I don't. But the tour guide decided to change the plan. She decided to take us to Assisi, Italy, the place where St. Francis is buried. We weren't supposed to go there, so she took a vote to see if people wanted to go to this really interesting place or Assisi, Italy. I don't remember how I voted, but I do know that the Assisi people won. And so we went there, to this place where St. Francis is buried. We were met by Brother Matthew, one of the Franciscan monks, and he led us directly underneath. This is the tomb of St. Francis, and then directly underneath that is a classroom. And he started teaching. He started talking about the life of St. Francis. But right in the middle of it, I don't know what everybody else experienced, but right in the middle of it, he was suddenly talking only to me. And he started answering all of my questions that I'd been asking myself that previous night in the order that I'd been asking them. I had never talked to this man before, and suddenly he knew everything that I needed to hear. God spoke. God called my bluff. I had said, God, if you are real and you want me to know something, you're going to have to show me something. And God did. God reminds us, our gospel reminds us, will God not hear those who cry to him day and night? The answers I needed came quickly. But they don't always come that quickly, and they don't always come that straightforward, and they don't always come with the answers that you want. I still remember it like it was yesterday, my first faith crisis. I don't consider that high school thing to be a faith crisis, because to have a faith crisis, you have to have some commitment. And I hadn't had a commitment then. But it was my senior year of undergrad. This is 3 years later. I woke up in the middle of the night with the kind of fear that you can taste. It's sour, metallic, terrible. I threw my pillow at the wall to try and chase it away, but it was there to stay. It was written on me. A question that I know many of you have uttered. How do you know? How do you know that when you die there will be a loving being waiting for you on the other side? How do we know we are not simply telling ourselves what we want to hear? And even though I thought God had spoken to me in Italy, this was 3 years later, long enough for me to wonder, did I actually hear what I thought I heard? Or am I just telling myself that? It was just one moment. Where is God now? I found doubt in the place of certainty, questions in the place of answers. How do you really know? How can you be sure? So I did the only thing I could think of. I went chasing after God. I was intent on finding God, recapturing the God that I had met in Italy. I prayed and I prayed without ceasing. I read and I read every book that I could find on religion and God and hope. I talked and talked. I met with pastors and rabbis, with abbots and philosophers, anyone that I thought might just maybe have the answer that I was looking for. And whereas some of the information I found was useful, worthwhile, it was the wrong answers, the bad words, the troubling things I heard over that time period that profoundly changed me, that helped me to realize the flaw in my search. As you can imagine, the real thing that was bothering me was death. So I was doing my best to avoid any thought of death. Focus on the good, ignore the bad. That was journey one of my faith crisis. So I've been skipping a lot of classes, don't tell my teachers. But I decided, well, I'm going to go to my film class, because, who doesn't like a little cinematic escape? The only problem was they were showing the movie Persephone. It's a Greek tragedy about a woman named Persephone who has to sacrifice herself in order to assuage the gods. And she uttered this line that I still hear, and I still feel my reaction to hearing this. She said, "How can I go on to death when I know only dust and shadow remain?" Yikes. That was not the word that I needed to hear while I'm trying to avoid death. Now, University of Washington is a big school, but, in your classes you get to know people, and the people in the class knew what I was going through. And when that line was said, the whole class groaned, because they knew how that would hit me. I decided at that point to take a break from school. I'd kind of taken a break, but now I was going to take a full-fledged break. So I went home to my parents' house, which was fine. I got to just sleep in and eat. And then I came out one morning and there were 3 dead baby birds right in front of the house. There's no nest, no cats. No reason why they should be there, but while I'm trying to do everything in my power to avoid thinking about it, there it is. My doubt bounced back. I decided to go looking for an open church, which is harder than you might think. I thought, I'll find God in the church, because God lives in a church, right? So I did find an open church, and I snuck in, and I went into the sanctuary, and I kneeled at the altar, and I said, God, show me something. Open the ceiling, make a sound, turn on and off the lights, anything, I'll take it. Just do something. I have never heard a church go that silent. It was as if that building was dead. God had completely disappeared. I won't recount every minor detail of this faith crisis, but just know not a day went by where I didn't pray that God would send me some sign, some knowledge, some hope. And not a day went by without a reminder of death, and without the overwhelming silence of God. But I will tell you how it ended, because because this would be a terrible sermon if I just said amen. I was walking on the UW campus at one point, go Huskies, praying that God would send me a sign. And at that moment, a person walked past me wearing a shirt that said simply, "Signs." And I started thinking, well, that's great. God's mocking me. God is literally mocking me. Laugh it up, God. I hope you're having a great time. But I decided to follow through on the marketing. I went home and I watched the movie Signs featuring Mel Gibson. And that movie ends with a priest, Mel Gibson, who has forsaken his calling because all these terrible things happened to him right in a row. But he starts piecing together all the signs of his life that have been preparing him for this moment in which he'll defeat aliens. Now, I don't have to defeat aliens, at least not yet, but when I was sitting there, I suddenly started putting together all the pieces of that faith crisis. It was a clear story from beginning to end. The one thing I was trying to avoid, death, was there every day. I was being told a story. I just didn't like the answer. My prayers were being responded to. I just didn't want to hear what I was being told. As a pastor, I get asked about death a lot. And if I lived my life avoiding it, if I lived my life not talking about it, not finding answers about it, I could not do my job. God was preparing me every step along the way, even though I did not want that preparation. All the while I've been chasing God, God was chasing me. I've been crying day and night for God to respond, and God was responding. One more story. It's probably my most interesting and fairly essential to my faith story. I graduated seminary, and I was having trouble finding a call. I was looking for 9 months. When you're not getting paid, that's a long time. Student loans had started. I was starting to get worried about what I would do next. I'd gotten a lot of, it's between you and another candidate, but sadly. And so I found myself on that night out in front of a bar in Berkeley called The Pub. It was my bar of choice. And I was sitting on the corner there praying up to the stars silently saying, God, if I'm called to this, where is the church? God, if I'm supposed to be a pastor, what am I doing right now? Now a homeless man walked by, asked me for change for the bus. And I gave it to him, and he said, thank you. And then he said, if you want to know God's plans, you have to be patient. And he kept walking. I cried, and God responded over and over again. Now I've experienced other miracles, other bits and pieces of God along the way, but those are the three that make up much of the meat of my story. God speaks most regularly, and no, I don't know why, in the quiet moments. The moments of coincidence, of serendipity, the moments that are so very mundane but so undeniably full of meaning. But they are miracles. And they are everywhere. How often do we share them? How often do we share our story? I think we get trapped in the people already know the story. They've heard it. I told it to this person over here, so obviously that person I've never talked to has talked to 15 people to get it from them. Or we think, I don't want to share my story because I don't want to be one of those people. People don't want to hear that. They've heard enough of that. But how often are people crying out day and night for that bit of meaning that is within you? He's waiting for you to share and spread. Our first reading said, "For the time is coming when people will not put up with sound doctrine, but having itchy ears. They will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own desires and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander away to myths. As for you, always be sober, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, carry out your ministry fully." People have itchy ears and they'll take in almost anything. We are so desperate for meaning, any kind of meaning. And so many times we worry that it's not available to us. But the reality of God is everywhere, waiting for us to build on what we've been given. Through cries of justice, through a shoulder to cry on, through a shared story that someone needed to hear. Don't let your story only live within you. Don't let your cries only live within you. Don't let the work of God in your life only live within you. Share your story and share it again. People have itchy ears and they are waiting to hear how the God that is real has chased you through life. Amen.